Jensen Huang just walked onto live television and said something that stopped everyone in their tracks.
I think there's a deep misunderstanding. What Cloud is definitely revolutionary, and it's an inflection point for AI. It's the first time that AI can perceive, it can reason, but it can also do work.
I think there's a deep misunderstanding. That's Jensen Huang not mincing words, not hedging, not giving a diplomatic non-answer. He looked straight at the camera and told the world that investors are reading this situation completely wrong, and given who he is and what he knows, that's not something you can just scroll past. So let's actually understand what's happening here, because the fear driving this sell-off is real and it makes sense on the surface. The logic goes something like this. Artificial intelligence can now write software. It can draft legal documents. It can handle customer service, data analysis, even complex coding tasks. So if a machine can do the work that these companies are selling tools to help humans do, why would anyone need those tools anymore? Why pay for Salesforce if an agent can just handle your entire sales pipeline? Why pay for SAP if the artificial intelligence figures out your supply chain on its own? That's the thesis that's been wiping billions off the market, and it sounds convincing, until Jensen explains why it's wrong.
And so what's likely going to happen is that agents won't replace the tools, but agents will use tools. That's the reason why we also say agents are tool users.
Did you catch what he just said? Agents won't replace the tools. Agents will use the tools. That one sentence is the entire argument. And once you understand it, the panic starts to look a lot less rational. Think about it this way. When cars became mainstream, people didn't stop building roads. The roads became more important. When smartphones took off, people didn't stop using cell towers. The demand for cell towers exploded. A new layer of technology almost never destroys the layer beneath it. It depends on it. That's exactly what Jensen is saying about artificial intelligence agents and the software platforms they're supposedly going to replace. He gave a simple example that makes this crystal clear. Why would an artificial intelligence agent rewrite a web browser when the browser already exists? Why would it rebuild Excel from scratch when Excel is right there? These tools exist because they work, because decades of engineering went into making them reliable. A smart agent doesn't rebuild the wheel. It grabs the wheel and drives. And this matters enormously for companies like ServiceNow, like SAP, like Salesforce. Because if Jensen is right, these aren't companies that artificial intelligence is going to eliminate. These are companies that artificial intelligence is going to run on top of. Their platforms become the infrastructure that agents operate inside of. Their data, what Jensen calls systems of records, becomes the ground truth that agents read from and write back to. But here's the question that should be sitting in your mind right now. This is one man's opinion, but no matter how well informed, the market is made up of thousands of investors with their own analysts, their own models, their own data. So who's actually right? Jensen Huang or Wall Street? Hold that thought, because the answer is about to get a lot more interesting.
And so I have 42,000 biological employees, and I'm going to have hundreds of thousands of digital employees, and together we're going to use a lot more tools.
Let that land for a second. He's not talking about a modest increase in productivity. He's talking about going from 42,000 human employees to hundreds of thousands of digital ones. And his point is not that tools become less important when that happens. His point is that tool usage goes up dramatically, because every single one of those digital employees needs the same platforms, the same software, the same infrastructure that human employees use today. He backed this up with something concrete. At Nvidia right now, the number of compiler programs running, the number of Python programs being executed, all of it is growing at an accelerating pace, not because they hired more engineers, because the artificial intelligence agents they've deployed are using those tools constantly, around the clock, at a scale no human team ever could. So, the narrative that artificial intelligence shrinks the software market isn't just wrong, according to Jensen. It's the opposite of what's actually happening inside his own company. The software market could get dramatically bigger, because the number of users isn't limited to the number of humans anymore.
I think so. I think the market's got it wrong. I think it's very likely that these companies that we're talking about are going to introduce agents that run on their platforms.
There it is. I think the market's got it wrong. Not softened, not walked back. Jensen Huang, whose company sits at the center of this entire technology shift, is telling you directly that the sell-off in software stocks is a misread of how this technology actually works in practice. And the specifics matter here. He's not making a vague bullish argument. He's saying that companies like ServiceNow are going to build artificial intelligence agents specifically fine-tuned to their own platforms. Not generic agents, specialized ones. An agent that lives inside ServiceNow will know customer service workflows better than any general purpose tool ever could. An agent built on SAP will understand enterprise resource planning at a depth that took SAP decades to develop. In other words, the incumbents have a massive advantage. Their data, their workflows, their years of domain expertise baked into those systems of records Jensen keeps mentioning. The artificial intelligence doesn't make that irrelevant. It makes it more valuable because now there's an intelligent layer that can actually utilize all of that institutional knowledge at scale.
Imagine one of these days when we have robots and these robots are in our homes. It's very unlikely that the robot will come up with a new Cuisinart. The robot will just read the manual for the Cuisinart and just use the Cuisinart.
That analogy is exactly the kind of clarity that cuts through the noise. Think about a robot in your kitchen. It's not going to spend 3 years engineering a better blender. It's going to pick up your blender and use it. It's not going to reinvent the microwave. It's going to press the buttons on yours. The tools you already own become more useful when something smarter shows up to use them, not less. And the same logic applies to enterprise software. The artificial intelligence agents coming into the workforce aren't going to rebuild Salesforce from scratch. They're going to log into Salesforce and do the work faster than any human sales rep ever could. Every click, every update, every data entry that humans use to do manually, agents will do it at 10 times the speed and 100 times the scale. That's not a threat to Salesforce's business model. That could be the biggest expansion of it in the company's history.
And the reason for that is because, as it turns out, that for most of our software engineers, coding is what they do, just as for a CEO, typing is what I do. But the purpose of the typing, the purpose of the coding is solving problems.
This reframe matters more than most people realize. The fear around artificial intelligence and jobs is almost always focused on the task. Coding, writing, analyzing. But Jensen is pointing at something deeper. The task was never the point. The point was always the problem being solved. The purpose of a software engineer was never to write lines of code. It was to build something that didn't exist before, to solve a problem nobody had figured out yet. That's called innovation, and that's not going away. What's changing is the layer at which humans operate. Instead of writing every line of code manually, engineers will describe what they want to build, and the agents will write it. Instead of spending 80% of their time on syntax and debugging, they'll spend that time on ideas, on architecture, on the problems worth solving. That's not a downgrade. For most engineers, that's a significant upgrade, and the companies that build the tools those engineers use every day, they're not going away either. They're becoming the operating layer of an economy that's about to run on artificial intelligence.